Well, congratulations. This is your first Academy Award nomination.
Oh, me?
You. Starting with you.
Yes, it is. It certainly is. I was watching it at 8:30 in the morning, New York time. And before the program was over, before I heard what the next category was, the phone started ringing.
Right.
And it's been ringing ever since. You've been through this before, but I haven't. And it's not like any other thing.
This seems like such a great Martin Scorsese film, but I know that this project really originated a long time ago with your interest in Howard Hughes. So could you talk just about how you first got interested in the subject and then decided to make a film?
Well, my perception of Howard Hughes had always been the older gentleman locked away in the hotel room, the monstrous figure, the man with the long fingernails, the long hair, the Kleenex boxes on his feet. And, it literally was a situation in which I went to a bookstore and saw a book with this young-looking man with an aviator cap. And it intrigued me, and it said Howard Hughes. And I had no idea Howard Hughes was even an aviator. I knew nothing about him other than he was, a billionaire germaphobe that isolated himself from the entire world. He was really around in the golden era of cinema and made this film called Hell's Angels, which you saw in the movie. And it was the first multi-million-dollar epic of that time. There had been $1 million movie made during that time, and Howard Hughes really established himself as this renegade producer that worked sort of outside of the studio system. And that, of course, intrigued me. And then him making The Outlaw, one of the most sexually explicit films of that time period, Scarface, one of the most violent. So he really was this renegade producer. Then, of course, all of his achievements with aviation. He was America's first billionaire, legitimate billionaire in America, who was also the great Casanova of his time. So all this information about Howard Hughes I knew absolutely nothing about. And I just became fascinated that a man could lead, 20 different lifetimes in one. And it was all related basically to his obsessiveness ultimately, and the fact that Howard Hughes was a man who had obsessive-compulsive disorder, and I believe he challenged himself with these insanely large projects constantly to, in a way, escape from these daily, rituals that he had with germs and these things that he had to do every day. Because somebody with obsessive-compulsive disorder literally needs to fight these urges to do these things constantly every day of their life, 24 hours. And I believe he honed all that energy into these immense, larger-than-life projects. For example, making the Spruce Goose and all these other amazing things that he did. So that whole character dynamic completely fascinated me. And I brought the project into Michael Mann, and he and John Logan made about 9 drafts. And then Marty got involved. Michael had just filmed Ali, so he said, I'm kind of biopicked out. Who do you want to bring this to? I was one name on my list. I just worked with the great Martin Scorsese, and I said, let's bring it to him. I know he would appreciate this time period and a character study like this of a man that takes a true emotional arc very seriously, and he did. He immediately said yes the next day, I believe.
And tell us the aspect of this being a movie about being famous and about being a sort of boy wonder in Hollywood, and that whole first section. How much did that sort of relate, to you, how much did that relate to your experience as an actor and your experience with fame?
It's always, it's always strange because people ask about what do you have in common? I have a terrible time answering it because you kind of take on that person's personas as much as you can, and any relationship to your own life kind of takes a back burner. But that's the best way I can answer that question.
I love your casting in this film. You did such a wonderful job with this role. But I want to ask about you getting this part, and Leo, your reaction at first hearing that, knowing this character, this Republican, nasty senator. Your reaction to hearing, well, what about Alan Alda for this part?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The story goes like this. You love this story, right? No, we were talking about, who was going to play Senator Brewster, and there were a list of names, and Marty kept coming back to Alan's name, and my immediate reaction, forgive me, was this is just the greatest guy in the world. This is Alan Alda. Everyone loves the shit of Alan Alda. He's the greatest guy. How is he going to play this, this disgusting, monopolizing a corrupt senator. Marty kept on saying, no, that's exactly why, that's what your perception is of him. And that was one of the most brilliant pieces of casting choices in the entire film, because he is so unbelievably slimy in this film. It's amazing. It makes my skin crawl. I mean, I want to reach over that table in that sequence where we're talking to each other and just wring his neck. He's so believable and so brilliant in this movie, and I want to be the first one to publicly congratulate him for his nomination, because seriously.
See, now, my end of the story is a little different. I got a call that Marty Scorsese was interested in my doing this picture, and I read the script, and it was a wonderful, flattering, a compliment like I'd never had before. To work in this wonderful picture with Leo, with Marty Scorsese directing it, I was so flattered. And then I agreed to do it, and then they sent me a picture of the guy I was playing. He was the ugliest man I ever saw. He was ugly inside and out, mostly out. And a lot of the flattery sort of dribbled out of that. But the scenes that we had together were so much fun. Also, I had that scene with Alec Baldwin, who I love working with too. But it was a very funny thing, and the only other time I talked about this with Leo was one night in a setting like this, in front of people, and I hadn't asked him this before, but he knows what I'm going to say tonight. The time we did the scene at the table, the lunch table, with the fish and with the fingerprint on the glass, they called me to the set. The set was lit. I sat down, cameras ready. No Leo. So I figure he'll be here in a minute. 15 minutes go by. I'm still sitting there. It's still lit. No Leo. So half an hour goes by. Now I'm starting to think, Leo is doing this deliberately. Leo knows I'm supposed to be mad at him in this scene, and he's making sure I'll be furious. And I said, I'm not going to let that get to me. I'm just going to play the scene. By the time he got there, I was so mad at him. And I said to him, that one an evening like this, I said, Leo, did you do that deliberately? He said, oh, no, they just had trouble getting the mustache on, but that's a good idea. It wasn't deliberate. Huh?
No, not at all.
Well, I wasn't really mad at you, anyway. But I got really mad at Howard.
Well, talk some more about that scene and about Martin Scorsese's work. I think actually with this film, he now has more nominations for his actors. Or more actors have been nominated.
Any other living director.
Any living director.
Really? Wow.
So thanks to you two
How
guys.
many, what is it, something, 13, 14, 15, something like that?
Gee, that's great.
A lot.
That's great.
But talk about, the working process. He's great with the big spectacle scenes, but there's that scene in the hotel room is one of my favorites.
That's one of the things I love about his work in every movie, and especially in this movie, because it's so big. It's on such a big canvas. Yeah. It has this sweep, and yet at the same time, it's told in such personal terms. Mm-hmm. Somebody else might have shot that big plane taking off from outside the plane. He shoots it on your face, and we know the plane is taking off, and we feel the emotion of the plane taking off, mm-hmm. because we see it on his face. This big event is told in the most personal, emotional terms. I love that in what he can do.
My perception of him before I worked with him was, in the types of films that he's done, I didn't know what the dynamic of Martin Scorsese would be, whether he would be a person with a lot of internal demons, let's say, or a tortured artist. But meeting the man, he has such, I can't even describe his affection for what he does and the actors that he works with. I mean, even somebody who comes in and literally has one or two words in a scene, he will, if need be, he will stand alone with that person and discuss their character dynamics for an hour. I mean, that's the kind of guy he is. And to be an actor and be able to work with him, you literally feel like you're not going to stop until you get it absolutely perfect.
I've never seen anybody so positive as him on the set. So, generous, positive, constructive, never says anything negative. And he's so aware that of the fact that the scene takes place between the two actors. That it's not if the camera's just on one person and the other one's off camera, in a close-up. He's very much aware that just because the camera's on that person, that doesn't mean that the other person off camera isn't just as important. Yeah. And after the shot is over, he'll compliment the person off camera as well, because he knows that that's all what's taking place in the scene.
One of the striking scenes in the film is after the movie premiere, where Katharine Hepburn has been flirting with all the executives, and there's that fight. That seems like a real turning point, that fight back at home. Could you talk about that and some of the scenes with Cate Blanchett? But there is such a progression, as you say, of the character.
Well, Katharine Hepburn certainly was, and is symbolized very rightfully so in this film as one of the great loves of Howard Hughes' life. And I looked at both of those people as kind of like the alpha male and the alpha female. There was no way these two animals were ultimately going to work out whatsoever. They were control freaks of their own environment, who they were. They were strong-willed, intelligent people that knew what they wanted out of life. And for these two people to ultimately work out, all the cards were stacked up against them.
Talk about the scene, the section of the film where you're in the screening room by yourself and really sort of falling apart, because was that an especially difficult section to make?
Well, yeah, there was, literally like 8-hour makeup sessions for that, because I had scar makeup. But what we became fascinated with, and we shot a lot more than is actually in the movie, was here you have this technical genius. This Howard Hughes really was a technical genius. He was a genius at what he did in aviation and business and all these things. And to watch all that genius, all that energy, then to be focused on the minutia of microscopic germs. And he had these memos that we read, man, that were hours and hours long, that went up to here literally about how his can of soup would be opened, the angle in which the paper bag would be delivered when he put his hand in, and this is a direct quote, so no germs may somehow leap off the person onto me. You got to get that image of germs leaping off of people and then somehow attacking him. But it was one of the most frightening depictions of mental illness, because he was such a technical genius, and all that genius went into hour-long memos of the imaginary rung of germs around the soup can, and the way the canisters of film would be delivered so no dust would be, corroding them, or when people open the door to the screening room, they have to wave 8 times so no bugs would somehow enter. I mean, it was frightening. So we really became obsessed with that. So we went on and on with Howard, doing these memos and talking in voiceover over a lot of these images.
Did you find yourself repeating things after those scenes?
Oh, yeah.
Did any of it carry over for a little bit?
Well, I have stories.
People think that actors become the characters, and that's usually not true. But sometimes the experience is so intense that it does change you a little bit.
The obsessive compulsive stuff, definitely. Yeah. Because I had things. We all have things that we do, that are obsessive, and so for me, I reverted back to my childhood, because there's literally when you're a child, you do a lot more of these things than you do as an adult, and when you're an adult, the logical part of your mind comes and says, this is absolutely unnecessary and ridiculous. I don't need to step on every single crack, or, the plane isn't going to crash if I don't step on this, or, scratch my head 4 times.
When you're in a car and you're passing telephone poles, do you do anything with the telephone pole?
Why, do you?
Yeah, click.
I thought so.
I click before the pole and after the pole.
What does that mean, click?
I go click, click, like that,
Oh, you say click out loud?
No, I don't say it. No, what? Like that would be crazy. So, I'm really lucky I didn't play his part.
Well, maybe in the sequel.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm about getting to be old enough to play the old guy in the room.
there's also the fun part of the character of this, being able to play this character as completely in control, bossing everybody around, being in charge of this great production, and then the way you take control in the hearings. I mean,
which were some of my favorite sequences, really, working with this guy. It really was. It was amazing because we've talked about it before, and a dynamic, I think, came into play where, and it's that rare sort of moment when you make a movie where everything disappears, and I had that with him. We were. The cameras, I think Marty was very deliberate in the way he positioned the cameras, You're almost like a voyeur watching these guys. You're almost sort of sitting there looking up at the two men on each side, and it's this verbal attack. And to play against, Alan here, it was amazing. We kind of felt like everything.
You know what I had? I had watched the tapes of those hearings many times, and there was only a brief moment when my guy was on camera, so I watched them a lot to try to get a feeling for that end of the hearing. Mm-hmm. But I saw Howard Hughes, therefore, over and over again. And the day we shot, I was sitting at the table, and in walked Howard Hughes. I mean, he was the guy I had seen on the tape. He was exactly the man. And he said, we were both speaking the transcript almost verbatim. So it was a very eerie feeling. And when he came in and he was really this guy, all I had to do was just try to destroy him. I mean, there was much less acting involved than usual.
And were those tapes important to you? I guess the televised hearings was one of the few
I think they must have
records.
Been kinescopes at the time, I guess, right?
But it's one of the few records we have of Howard Hughes in action.
Well, it's some of the only footage of, the man talking about anything other than, how a plane operates. Literally, he was truly a private person. He was very paranoid about the media and extremely private, and kept his life as private as he possibly could. I mean, the man once, there was a Life magazine article that came out about him, and he found it a little distasteful. So what he did was he sent his people to go to the printing press and bought every single copy that there was to be distributed nationally, hundreds of thousands of copies, bought them all and stored them in a warehouse. That's the kind of guy he was. I mean, he shunned away from the media, unlike anyone in the public eye that I've ever heard of. But certainly that was some of the most helpful stuff, to see the animal come out in him, of a man whose integrity was being attacked for something that he loved so much and had so much passion for and devoted his life to, which was aviation, and his, essentially his reputation in that whole world. And then he was probably the only man at that time that could single-handedly take on the United States Senate.
And there wasn't time in the movie to show what Hughes actually did, which was to force Brewster to come around to the other side of the table and get sworn in and give testimony. I mean, he actually gave testimony to defend himself from Hughes's charges.
Okay, if you could talk about the preparation process, what you do before you start shooting.
I'll let Leo go first.
No, I'm going to let you go first.
And then I'll just...
No, I'm going to let you go first.
I want to take yours. I want to take some of yours. You know what's interesting to me? What I notice after all these years of trying to learn how to do it better each time is that I notice that I've invented my own method by trial and error. And it has some similarities with what I guess most everybody does. But I have my own curve on it. But I notice I sort of find a different method with each job. Each different thing I play needs different, something different from me in getting ready for it. And really for me, it always boils down to what does and this is, I mean, everybody knows this. There's no great insight in this. This is a 2,400-year-old idea from Aristotle. What does the character want, and how does the character try to get it? But that's so important to me that is the way the character is described too. Not just the action of the play, what's the character trying to accomplish, but for me, I understand who the character is, what the person is like, by how they go about getting what they want. Is the person ingratiating? Is the person bullying? Is the person devious? How do they go about getting what they want? So in that in that way, who they are and how they behave and what they're doing at every moment that keeps them alive is all tied up in the same little thing. What do they want? You know?
For me, you know, I think an actor's job sometimes, or most of the time, is to convey an experience that they may not necessarily have gone through in their own life. So for me, what I'm constantly trying to do, if there's something that I am completely unfamiliar with, and oftentimes there are plenty of those in any given movie, it's drawing upon something similar in your own life that gave you that kind of emotion or that kind of drive. It could be anything. And literally, if there's a scene that you're unsure about playing or you're not familiar with, it's writing down in the script that story. And it's like a little side note to yourself. It's like a joke. Remember that time where your brother took your G.I. Joe and you were so pissed you saw red and you wanted to rip his face off? That's exactly how that character feels there. And it's a series of doing those kinds of things. And you know, there's always I've done a lot of characters that are based on real-life historical figures. So there's the whole aspect of preparation when you do play somebody like Howard Hughes and trying to accumulate as much information as you possibly can on that person. And I did a lot with this. I got to meet people who knew Howard Hughes. I got to meet Jane Russell, his ex-wife Terry Moore. I got to meet a doctor and stay with a patient that knew about OCD. There's so much stuff at my disposal, but there's also a great joy in playing a character that there is no history on, where you can make all that stuff up. And that's the fun part about doing those types of characters, is making up these stories and making up things in your own life that you can somehow relate to that character emotionally.
I of course agree with what Leo said, and that's the other part of what I look for too, is how I can relate what this person wants to what I want. You know, I go so far as to think, not only do I feel, this is especially playing a so-called bad guy. It doesn't matter what the person wants. I have to see how not only do I want it, but I deserve it. And if I go in there knowing I deserve to get what this guy is after, well, I can relax about it because I don't have to pretend to want it. I want it. It's mine, you know. And I notice if at any moment if I hear my voice getting tense or I feel I have to emphasize a word or something, I hear that and I think, you know what? That's where you're not connecting it to you. It's I mean, you're getting rhetorical about it. That's and it turns always that thing where it was louder and strained, it always turns out to be intimate and quieter because I finally connected it. And the most wonderful moment, I bet you feel the same way, is when you realize that things are happening just right and there's no acting going on at all.
Nothing to think about.
Is nothing to think about, nothing to worry about. You're not trying to accomplish anything. You're just there doing it. You know, that's what a great feeling that is. That's the ecstasy of acting.
I agree.
The moments like that are what we hope for all the time, and usually you get it a couple of minutes a week. You know?
How does that mesh with the director's process? Because I'm so used to thinking of film as a director's art, and this is such a Scorsese's vision, and you're both talking about very personal processes and finding.
Well, you've directed. You better answer that.
Well, I learned a lot because I have directed movies, but I learned a lot watching Marty, and I think everybody directs, I think, as an extension of their own personality. Their style of directing, I mean, is an extension of their personality, and I'm kind of, I like to be gregarious, and I like to take people out to lunch and dinner. And to me, that's the most important part of the preparation, that everybody get in the same frame of mind and trust one another. Marty is so positive that you trust him right off the bat. It's immediate.
And how about for you? What about your interaction with Scorsese and the working process helped you find Howard Hughes?
I got to work with him twice now, and it's almost like you expect these incredible things after a while. You know what I mean? They become normal. And you almost forget, wow, that was a genius idea, because they're so constant, you know? And it to me, what I love is, you know, he does have that great dynamic with actors, but it's all the tons of research and thought that he's put into all the other elements of the movie too that you don't need to think about. It's not like, you know, in some films or some things you do, you work and you're concentrated so much on your character and what you have to do, but then you're saying, oh God, that looks terrible, that set looks awful, and these guys don't look like gangsters at all. Geez, they look like, you know, a bunch of college students with, you know, grubby clothes on. That stuff is so taken care of for you, you know? So there's this element of being able to relax that he's put so much thought into the, you know, into the details of the film, and he's constantly striving to make things as authentic as possible every instance.
Yeah. And I just want to ask you this as a last question, because I know we have to wrap it up, but then what is the process of seeing the final film?
Well, it's, you know, I've had an interesting experience. I've seen this picture 5 or 6 times, and you must have seen it many more times. I'm always interested in the picture every time I see it, and I see it on another level.
Every time I do a movie, it's really hard to distance yourself from thinking about what actually happened that day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember working with my first director for This Boy's Life, and he said, you know, Leonardo, you can't really watch a movie that you've done and appreciate it for what it is for at least 5 years, because you have to sort of erase the memories that immediately happen after you make a movie. So you can't really look at the movie objectively, in other words. But I don't know. Just for me, it's literally become it's been a dream come true to see this movie and think about this character and see the development process over 8 years and watch what John Logan did with the script and wonder if a character like this, like Howard Hughes, could it all be sympathetic. You know what I mean? Could draw an audience in and have the audience be in his innermost journeys and in his innermost thoughts and his paranoia, and still, you know, relate to this man. And that's a testament to all the development that was put in beforehand with John and Michael and what they did, and certainly Marty. It's the Manchurian Candidate took something like 10 years to develop, and this is one of those situations where it was like 10 years of thought that was put into this movie, and then to finally see it up on screen is it's an amazing gift.
Well, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the ride for this
Thank
movie.
you. Yes.
Thank you. Good night. Good night. Thank you.